Okay, it looks like it's our time. So I wanted to go ahead and get things started. The compliance and security is an interesting topic, at least for those of us that work in that space. And one of the things I wanted to start off with is a little bit of a discussion about what security and what compliance is, at least in my viewpoint. So from the perspective of I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next slide, but I'm going to transition here in a minute. From Amazon's perspective, from AWS's perspective, we're thinking security first, or as the slide says, as priority zero. That's the baseline, the beginning. So the mindset that we actually have in that perspective is to ensure security. We do so by doing a risk assessment, threat assessment, pulling all this information together, creating the security controls that are then enforced and checked off via compliance. So security being ultimately that assessment and those controls that you put in place in order to secure the infrastructure, and that's where the focus is. It definitely needs to be there initially, and then compliance being the ability to then have the checklist to make sure you're doing them and you're audited to that account. Sometimes that's lost on people that's what where that kind of setup is, and sometimes you get lost in checking the boxes, because checking the boxes is what your compliance requires you to do, or the government requires you to do under FISMA. So I wanted to try to drive that home a little bit more importantly, or maybe get the point across a little bit more by showing you a little video. I'm going to transition over here to a video, and you'll find that I'll tell stories today and try to, tell stories about startups of various things. In this case, I'm going to tell you a story that kind of goes along with that theme of security and compliance. On the weekends, I'm a little bit of an amateur race car driver, and the racing body that I race with has a tech inspection process for the race cars to make sure they're nice and safe. But even then, they do so. Sometimes just because that compliance checklist that's there, that they have, may not align with my risk or the level of risk I'm willing to assume, or anyone for that matter. So in this case, doing your own risk assessment, and in this case, doing my own risk assessment, I actually did some things to my race car that were above and beyond the initial compliance checklist that the racing body had, and therefore my compliance checklist had more stuff on it. So in this case, we'll make draw the analogy from security to safety. And I just want to show you, I'll set this up a little bit. I'll show you a video. I have an abbreviated version here, so it doesn't take too long, of a race that I had earlier this year at Pittsburgh International Raceway. And in that process, you'll actually see some of the data there in the bottom right-hand corner. And had the left front tire go out in this car. As I was cresting, you'll see about 120 miles an hour or so. And therefore, controlling the car is a little bit difficult at that. So I'll let you see what happens, and then we can go back to talking about what I was just saying, doing the security risk assessment versus just going with someone else's compliance checklist rather than having your own. So I'm going to go ahead, and hopefully this will just kick off in good fashion, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of audio. Yeah, I might get the audio out of this one. Vroom, vroom. There we go. At least you get some vroom, vroom. Oh, you guys actually wanted to see the wreck, didn't you? You guys are just bloodmongers. You want to see me bounce off that wall. Well, take note of the speeds and things like that, because in the full video I'm about to show you that you actually do get to see me bounce off the wall. It actually has, doesn't have the data on it, because what happened here is that the data stopped, therefore the video, at least in this case, stopped, because the data system actually, when it spikes 30, hits 30 Gs of force, it'll actually shut off to protect itself and save the data. So it actually stopped. So I'll go ahead and transfer over to the one without all the nice little data stuff on it. And we'll take a look at the full version.
It starts with one thing. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. Design is rhyme to explain in due time. All I know, time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock takes life away. It's so unreal. Didn't look out below. Watch the time go right out the window. Trying to hold on, didn't even know I wasted it all just to watch you go. I kept everything inside, and even though I tried, it all fell apart. What it meant to be will eventually be a memory of a time I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all. But in the end, it doesn't even matter.
So that's the full version for all of you that wanted to see the blood and gore. Luckily, there was no blood and gore. And the reason why is because if you notice, when I first bounced off that wall at 85 miles an hour, the car went up into the air and then came down right on the top of the windshield. Like I was saying, the compliance body for the racing does not require, if you look right here and right here, these bars that are there. The risk assessment that we did when building this car and many of the other cars that I've built indicated that if you had a wreck and you didn't have that bar in there, just like what happened to me, the roof would cave in on the front and crush into you. So by adding that $100 worth of steel and doing that extra little bit that was above and beyond what the minimum requirement that was on that compliance list, because there wasn't a safety analysis in this case done by anyone that's just building to the spec, I was able to walk away from that incident and was back racing and won the Southeast Division Championship, a few months later. So that's one of those things that keep in mind when you're thinking of securing your environment, not just to do so to a compliance checklist that someone else has done that doesn't have the analysis done up front. That's how, from AWS's perspective, how we do the things that we do. We're looking at security because you don't care if we're compliant if you get hacked because of our failures. So we want to look at it from a security perspective. We're going to go ahead and take security first and back that up to ensure that we're allowing you to be compliant in those verticals that you need to, FSMA being one of them. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer back over to the other side here. So let me go ahead and get going here. So of course, in this space, you definitely want to be able to be compliant, starting off with, once again, very highly recommended starting off with a risk assessment that allows you to set that bar for you, as well as to ensure that you're including the controls that are required for compliance. In this space, we've obviously met a lot of those certifications. You've heard earlier today from various speakers, some of those various compliances that we've actually met, and here's a nice list of them there. For those of you, because the VPC track I think is actually going on right now, so for those of you that didn't get to go to that because you're here, I'm going to give you just a little bit of VPC training because that's going to be important to us as we start to talk about some of the other compliance things that GovCloud and other things provide. So initially, what you have here is actually the just a basic diagram of what a virtual private cloud environment looks like. Down in the left-hand bottom corner, you're going to see that that's your network or your laptop for that matter. You have the ability to then VPN connect into our data center. You can do that either using IPsec tunnels, hardware-to-hardware device, if that's what you're coming from your data center to ours. OpenVPN and various other ways to do so, software-based. Once you're actually within our data center, we actually use a logical network isolation akin to a VLAN for those of you that are familiar with that, but not specifically VLAN technology. A little bit of our own alien technology there to enable that. And then you have the ability that once you're in that environment, you can actually set up subnets in there, and that's what's represented by the 3 other little breakouts there. And on those subnets that you establish, you can actually go ahead and establish access control lists. And for those of you that may have come from Jim Sharf's IME presentation just recently, you can actually also go ahead and set up which users have access to subnets along those same lines. By now having these ACLs on each of these little subnets, you can actually do a multi-tier security architecture within a VPC. So you can have a production, or even better from that, you can actually have a web tier, a database tier, an application tier, all within that, and set up your rules to allow that communication that actually fits the needs of each of those things. In this current environment, the way it's set up right here now that you see, you actually have all of the communication that would go into those would actually come in through the customer's network indicated in the bottom corner there. We went ahead and added functionality to actually connect an internet gateway such that you can go ahead and now have a natted firewall type of ACL environment where you can actually open up ports to the internet. By opening up those ports to the internet, obviously then you can actually field traffic or be able to deal with traffic directly from the internet, not having to have it all go through your home network, if you will, to get into that environment. This is, rather important because we actually, initially when we launched it, it was a data center on a stick. You could get all the advantages of cloud bursting, being able to use the dynamic scalability and dynamically pull your resources out or add resources so that you could do a lot of those things that the cloud offered while still maintaining all of that communication coming from your home network. In your home network, you can obviously run whatever types of devices you want for the traffic that passes through there. So this quasi-hybrid model that allows you to be able to do this also allows you to go ahead, like I was saying before, you can actually run a web tier within that and have that web tier, that subnet, that's the web tier, be the only one that actually has access from the internet, and the rest of them are all still only accessible from your home network. This is all configurable to your requirements and to your application's needs across the board. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out there so that you understand some of that's provided. In VPCs, just some of the basic things, you do have the ability to use your own IP addressing schemes. So it's purely up to you to go ahead and do so. It allows you to set up all of the access control lists, ingress, egress filtering, and manage all of that to your heart's content. And it allows the flexibility for you to take those services, the pieces and parts of those services, to meet your business objectives as well as your security and compliance needs by layering those things together. And you'll see that a little bit more as we go on. So getting more back to the security and compliance side of things, everybody hears, cloud is cool, but those of you in the federal space are like, cloud is cool, but we have these extra requirements that may not be met by, according to what your definition or your implementation of cloud is. That's, in some of these instances, you have data that must stay within the continental United States. That's in the case of ITAR data or some other controlled unclassified information. Obviously, there's federal standards that we must meet under FISMA and various other regulations for those CUIs, as we like to call them. In the case of ITAR, U.S. persons only access. Carrying that on, there's different bars for data, machine, network isolation, and how do you go about meeting all of those within a cloud environment. And there are ways, kind of moving forward. We launched the AWS GovCloud last August in order to attempt to meet some of those needs. It's a rather interesting story, and it all goes back to Tom and Kawaja that you met this morning during Andy Jassie's presentation, and they were really some of the impetus to actually push us towards doing this. And you can see that the customer obsession is there, that we're willing to actually build a region based upon input from not only one customer, but definitely we're influenced by them to do so. Tom and Kawaja have done a lot of, from NASA JPL, have done a lot of work within AWS, much of which you saw this morning, but they've been working on AWS on the platform doing all kinds of various things. But one of the things they always got, stood up on or unable to do was anything that was ITAR compliant. So the export controls that are, required around that data, which may be used in military applications. So in the case of NASA, things such as rockets, those things such as the little nuclear power plant that's in that Mars rover that the lab that they just sent up, or just landed, I should say. Those are the types of things that require this extra level of protection, of course. So in doing so, we actually worked with them to identify these requirements, and not only for ITAR specific, but also being able to cover a lot of those other controlled unclassified information. So we went ahead and launched GovCloud. So obviously targeted at governmental entities that are supporting higher compliance requirements. And you notice I don't necessarily say security, because in a lot of cases, our security baseline for all the 9 regions is the same. We use that same control infrastructure, same control matrix across the board. We will add, in this case for GovCloud, additional compliance requirements, in this case being U.S. persons only, physical and logical access. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But carrying that on, obviously, in trying to meet those different requirements, one of the things that we looked at was being able to do more than just ITAR in there, and being able to do more than just have federal government customers in there. I know we're talking about federal compliance and best practices, but GovCloud actually is one of those things that, from that standpoint, we actually do allow state and local entities and contractors that actually support those verticals into GovCloud, provided though that they meet some of the requirements down below. So as the provider, number one, of GovCloud, AWS is responsible for providing that environment with only U.S. persons, both from the physical, so the data center techs, the security people for that physical environment, all the way up to the software development engineers or administrators, if you will, that are logically logging into them. So from our side of the house, everyone's a U.S. person that has access into GovCloud. From a customer perspective, what we have is it's much more of a community cloud environment, and you don't have the ability to swipe your credit card and go. And there's a reason behind that, and that's because we actually do have a bit of a vetting process, and you must be a U.S. person. I guess I should tell you what a U.S. person is if you're not familiar with the definition. We pulled it straight out of the ITAR regulation 120.15, which then references another U.S. code that I'm never going to remember how long that sucker is. It's under 8 U.S.C. something or other. But it basically comes down to a U.S. citizen or green card holder, or a government or an agency or entity that's incorporated or otherwise operated within the United States. So if you can meet that bar from being able to do so, you have access into this environment. The next step of that, though, is that you also need not be on what we call the denied parties list. So subject to restrictions, as it says there. Those restrictions are if you've gotten in hot water with the State Department for exporting stuff you weren't supposed to be, you're going to be on a denied parties list, and we're going to check and verify that at the time that you request for an account, and then on a regular basis thereafter to ensure that you're not denied access to ITAR or other export controlled information. And the next one is that you comply with the export, ITAR and the export control regulations. And that's the one that I think a lot of people get hung up on. Oh my God, I need to comply with that. But the reality is that if you have no export control information to begin with, you are complying with it by not having it. So that bar in the past has scared people away that otherwise would want to operate in GovCloud. And that basically comes down to what we're requiring in that case is that if you have ITAR information, we're going to maintain the compliance from the data center floor, the concrete, all the way up to, in this case, the virtual private cloud environment that's presented to you. If you wish to carry that forward and actually operate in an ITAR compliant environment, you need to be responsible for your ITAR program within that space. Once again, going back to a shared responsibilities model. I don't look into your VPC, and therefore I can't be responsible for managing an ITAR program for you or a whatever compliance program you wish to meet. And that's the truth of the matter is it's not just ITAR, it's any compliance or security regime that you wish to hold on in that space. So the good part of that is that provided you can meet that bar, if you will, you can actually operate within this community environment. And the nice thing about the virtual private cloud technology and the logical isolation that it provides is that it's providing an isolation such that one customer can actually operate a fully ITAR compliant environment, US persons only, all the way through, and another customer, or that same customer for that matter, could actually have another virtual private cloud environment within the same physical infrastructure that is a public website that is accessible over the internet out to the world. And you could actually have a website like Recovery.gov or a site like that that is hosted in GovCloud, world accessible, and then have another VPC that actually has an ITAR compliance program. That isolation is the barrier that is providing that isolation across the board. In going to that, we've actually, obviously highly tested it and pen tested it and had third-party auditors come in to verify that. So moving a couple steps forward on that, we actually have needs from the standpoint of doing data isolation. If you've played with or recently come from a presentation by Jim Scharf in regards to IAM, that's where a lot of the access controls are actually carried forward from the different services into not only GovCloud but the rest of the environment. From a network isolation, we've already talked about VPC, and in GovCloud specifically, we actually have the ability, and once again I say the ability because it's not required that you do, but for those on the federal government compliance side of the house, we have FIPS 140-2 level 2 endpoints for the encryption termination sites, so your SSL, things like that, as well as the API endpoints. What that means is that those devices meet a level of compliance established by NIST under FIPS 140-2 level 2. You don't have to use them within GovCloud. We actually offer both. So we can scale the use of them or the size of them based upon the actual use, taking on our own model in that case. Because there are other use cases that in some cases the state and local entities may not have a need to use those FIPS endpoints. So they are there for your using and choice. It provides you the ability to use that which you see fit. So going down the next level, machine isolation. So sometimes compliance requirements dictate that you still are, regardless of all the security white papers and all the documentation we put out there, there's still those that prefer to be on their own hardware. So we do make available, as you may have heard in other sessions, dedicated instances. What a dedicated instance is that you are the only customer that is running on that dedicated hardware, if you will. So your use of that environment now has a machine that is yours. And think about that. Now you have a machine that is yours, that's isolated. You're using VPC, so you've got a logically isolated network with all of these ingress and egress filtering ACLs that you can put up wherever you so see fit. On the instances themselves, in each and every case, you actually have these nice things, even in a dedicated instance, that actually allows you to go ahead and set the security groups for allowance on both sides as well. So you have these things that kind of step all the way out, and you can start to see that rather than looking at policy and procedure as the primary means by which to meet security, we're very much looking towards technical controls so that we prevent those things from ever happening to begin with. So you actually have all these different steps across the board that allow you to go ahead and basically prevent things from happening by locking it down to a least privilege environment. And that's one of the things that some of the core of our security tenets, if you will, across the company is least privilege. And in this case, we kind of carry that forward, allowing our customers to do the same thing. And that's, that's one of the things that you find in FISMA is that the idea of least privilege and access control from that standpoint. And I think what we actually have provided here in this environment actually takes it even a step further because you're in this walled environment that allows you to be able to implement many layers of this. So last year, like I said, we launched GovCloud, and we launched with a minimal service set. Rationale for that was time to market, get it out there so that people could start to use it and tell us those services that they want thereafter. So we went ahead and launched with the basic things that you see here. So your EC2s, your simple storage, elastic block store, and going down the line, you can actually read it. I won't read them for you. But in this case, for GovCloud, one of the things is that VPC, like I said, is a requirement. You can't run classic EC2 or regular AWS environment within GovCloud because of that boundary that we require. And we had these various other things that are here. So just last month, we went ahead and added features and services onto GovCloud. And we went ahead and added on HPC type instance types. We went ahead and put load balancing, elastic load balancing in there. What you'll see here is an attempt towards pragmatic parity, as I like to call it, and that is those things which make sense within a government cloud environment in that community for those services to be there. There's some services that don't make a lot of sense for us to try to put in that space just because there's no value add to having it in a compliant environment such as this. An example being Mechanical Turk or something of that nature, or CloudFront itself. That would mean we'd actually have try to put CDN points of presence out in Brazil or something like that that actually were on U.S. soil. And I don't know if the embassy is willing to let us start running off of their property out there, so we're kind of stuck on that one. But those are the types of things. So those things that we actually have that are in GovCloud right now. One of the things that we don't have in GovCloud today that we have in the rest of the environment is a management console. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But prior to that, we have a Elastic Wolf. For those of you that are legacy AWS users that go back to the days before regular Amazon or AWS had a console, we had Elastic Fox. And that was a Firefox plugin that layered on top. I see some legacy heads bobbing. Yep, remember those days, APIs only. We're going to go use the client. In this case, what we've done is we don't have the management console up and running today because obviously for the traditional environment, you're actually logging in initially through the Amazon.com front end using your user ID and password, the same one a lot of times that you use on the retail side to get to the console. At least the initial step to get to the console. Hopefully you're using MFA as well beyond that. But what we actually have done is taken Elastic Fox, which was at the point of almost deprecation by the regular AWS environment, have now put it on steroids, if you will, and we now call it Elastic Wolf, and it has all of the new functionality that's required in order to be the front end, the GUI, if you will, to run and operate our environment that is GovCloud, but it's also able to be used outside of GovCloud. So the nice thing here is that you have the ability to use Elastic Wolf on all regions if you so choose. It's an open source effort that we do support, highly support, and run through security reviews and the like. But from that standpoint, what you have is the ability to have an in-house client to manage your AWS resources for GovCloud. This may be something that's rather important on the government side of the house because you may not want to always rely on a management console that is outside of your agency or outside of your environment. In this case, this allows you the ability to go ahead and have it in-house or a client that you can actually, because it's open source, customize and modify to your heart's content and make it capable from that standpoint. So that's Elastic Wolf for you, and you can see where you can actually download it. We'll continue to, one of the questions we get is, you're going to have a console in the future, and are you going to continue to support Elastic Wolf? We're going to follow the same model that we follow in all of the services that we offer, and that is, as long as there's a customer demand for it, we will support it. When that customer demand diminishes or decreases to a point where it doesn't make sense to support it anymore, it'll stay out there available in open source, and we'll deprecate support to it. I don't foresee that happening anytime soon, but that's pretty much the mentality behind it. So feel confident that you can use Elastic Wolf and carry it forward. Oop, jumped. So just before going on, I want to talk a little bit about NASA. You've heard about this particular use case. I'm going to talk about a different one. It kind of goes back a little bit. But I want to give you a story about, I got a few minutes, story about a handful of guys at the FBI that had a need. The need was, they had a mission. That mission was to take a lot of data, like many of you have, and do stuff with that data in such a way as to downsize that data to actionable intelligence in a very quick period of time. And no matter how big a data center or how many data centers they went out and bought, provisioned, it was never big enough to deal with the stuff that came in on Friday at 4:30 that said there might be something going bad and you needed to go through these terabytes of data as quickly as possible to make sure that bad things didn't happen to good people. And that handful of FBI guys went looking out into, after they'd done the lights out, virtualized, fancy data center. 5-6 years ago, that was actually something to be said, an accomplishment. And went out looking to the technology providers for this thing that we'd heard about, cloud, the dynamic scalability, so that on Friday, when we got all that data, we could actually scale up, do stuff with it, and then scale back down when we're done, and actually be able to meet the mission needs that were put before us. Those 5 guys, or a handful of guys, I was one of. Your chief security officer here at AWS was another one, Bill, and a handful of other people that are around here. So in that model, one of the things that happened is that we went to AWS. We went to some of the other providers as well. None of them had anything that would actually lead us down the road of being able to do this type of an offering. So they, rather than us being a good salespeople trying to get them to offer or to provide us cloud, after many months of discussions, they actually talked us into coming on board in order to be able to someday provide cloud back to the government. So what you're seeing here for me, actually, for being the general manager of GovCloud, is a full circle. I've gone from being the customer that wanted that capability, turned it around, went all the way around, and now I'm providing that capability to you. So those of you that are sitting there in the space thinking, these guys don't really know what I need. I've been there 17 years in the federal government. Last half of that at the FBI, the first half in DoD, doing computer crime related actions. So that's the mentality of the team that's actually running GovCloud, and a good portion, actually most of the AWS security team as well. So the focus that you see on compliance and these types of things is there. So I just wanted to kind of give you that background so that you understand the team that's actually running GovCloud and running AWS security. So another story, as I still have 12 minutes, is we talked a little bit about NASA. You saw this morning an awesome presentation, and I think they actually have another one coming up today or tomorrow, maybe a little bit more in depth, from Tom and Kawaja. And they talked about the most recent Mars laboratory that they actually launched and did a lot of the live, or all the live streaming over AWS. And that's really what this one is talking about. I want to go back in time a little bit and talk about some of the things that they did with the previous Mars rovers. The previous Mars rovers, as you may recall, went to Mars successfully landed, had a planned life expectancy, I think, of about 90 days, because they had anticipated that the dusty environment that is on Mars, being that these units were actually solar powered, the dust would lay on top of the solar panels and they would die. And we'd get as much as we could out of 90 days, and that was great. For those of you on the federal side or used to OMB 300s and such, that's the kind of process that they went through to stand up the systems that are going to support that as well. So the life cycle is going to be 90 days. We'll try to keep them online for a little bit longer just in case, and go forward. So that's where the money was there to support it. So let's just say that those things didn't die in 90 days. They forgot or didn't know about until they started seeing the pictures coming back from the rovers of these little vortexes that were actually almost just like that vacuum cleaner that you see today with the tornado thing going on. These little vortexes would actually clean off those panels of all that dust, and they just kept living. But the problem is now you have a team back at JPL that has this problem that they have these old antiquated systems years later. They're still trying to communicate with these things on Mars. It takes them all this time to download and process all the data. They have about a 2-hour window of communicating with these things on a regular basis. They download the data. It takes them an hour and change to process the data. When they're done processing the data, they end up with only 10 minutes to communicate back to it to tell them what to do for the next little while. So from that standpoint, what they ended up doing is using AWS to be that dynamically scalable capability so that they could scale up lots of instances while they're actually downloading this data from these Mars rovers. Obviously, the cost is much less than trying to go out and buy new systems that they can't get because they didn't put it into their systems plan for, before. And they actually went ahead and were able to use AWS to shorten that time. So they still had the same time window, but 10 computers, processing the same amount of data rather than one antiquated one actually gives you a lot more mission time. So they gave them almost the full 2 hours in order to be able to come up with the commands, communicate back with these rovers, and enhance the mission capability of those rovers that are running around on Mars. So this is the mentality of the users of our different platforms. It's not only to save money, and it may more importantly be mission orientation to do more with the money that you have. The IT budgets are shrinking, but from that standpoint, being able to carry that forward. That was the impetus in the background behind we need more ITAR compliant type of environment, such as GovCloud, to be able to do that. So, how am I doing on time here? Doing good. So, another little story that goes along with this one. So we talked about Recovery.gov. This one goes back to our compliance a little bit more too. Get rid of the dry mouth. So, for those of you that don't know, Recovery.gov was actually, excuse me, get rid of that ice. Recovery.gov was actually one of the first, if not the first, federal publicly acknowledged systems that actually ran on AWS. And we had a partner, Smartronix, that actually had bid a contract for Recovery.gov based upon using our platform. And we got the call one day, and that we is actually me. Actually, it was Werner and I. Werner got the call because they lost my phone number, so they called Werner out in Seattle and said, hey, that we need to talk to that guy out in DC to do this Recovery.gov thing. Okay. So I get the email from Werner. We went ahead and actually sat down with them. And the interesting thing about the Recovery.gov process was we sat down in the CNA process, the certification and accreditation, since we're talking compliance, or at least a little bit. We sat down and started talking about their requirements. And remembering that risk analysis thing that I started off with, their biggest risk for Recovery.gov wasn't as much on the confidentiality and integrity, which is still important to them, no doubt. But the biggest thing they had was an availability issue. Because at the time, Recovery.gov was brand new, or recovery in general was brand new, and they needed to be able to deal with that spiky activity. They were going to put new data out on the site. It's going to be publicly announced that they are. Everybody's going to hammer the website. As you've learned here today, if you didn't know before, we're pretty good at dealing with those spiky types of applications. And that was one of the things that why they came to AWS to begin with. And in discussion looking at the requirements, doing a security threat analysis, or threat and risk analysis, was that the controls that needed to be in place allowed them to very quickly meet the requirements based upon the work that we had done from a security perspective that also met their compliance bars, and allowed them to very quickly launch their website out onto our environment, and did so in an amazing 22 days. Never heard of anything like that in the government before. Matter of fact, 22 days. I don't know if I could get pencils in 22 days back in the old days. So this was a quite amazing effort that was done. The team there that actually was working this realized that it's much more important from a perspective of, rather than having a risk avoidance model, be willing to take some risk, but only that risk that's necessary in order to meet your business objectives. The more risk you can take, you can probably accomplish more, and that's a decision that's left to, in this case, a designated approving authority. In this particular case, they saw that the controls that were in place would meet confidentiality and integrity from a FISMA standpoint, and definitely from an availability standpoint. Properly deployed, it was going to rock out in this space, and to date, Recovery.gov stands 2-3 years without any issues on any of the three different pillars, if you will, confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And I always knock on wood when I say that because you guys all know how that works. So we got a few more minutes. Actually, you've heard a little bit about this one potentially if you came to Teresa Carlson's briefing this morning. I'm going to zing by this one with the intention of being able to, for a very short period of time, talk about what's next. I promised in the promo that we'd actually tell you about what's coming up on the roadmap for GovCloud, and I actually want to do that, hold true to that. That is that we were talking about console earlier. That's the number one ask, actually, from the launch of GovCloud. Everybody said, where's console? So console is nearby. I'm not going to give you a date because I don't have a date just yet, but it's very close. I hope to be able to give it to you as a holiday gift. If not, very much a New Year's gift. So it's coming, it's close, honestly, not kidding. That's working in an environment that's unlike the other 8 regions that we have. You run into things that you don't anticipate. So we've actually run into some of those things, and they're not things that we can't overcome. It just takes more time. So we're taking the time necessary to do it right so that you get something that you're happy with and can use. And we will iterate on it, so when it comes out, feel free to provide feedback on that. So another one of the asks that I'm happy to say is on time and shall be very soon is DynamoDB. We'll actually have DynamoDB available in GovCloud rather shortly, and that should make many of you with those types of applications that need such a database pretty happy. So that's in the near term. Another database service that has been highly asked for is RDS and the various flavors of RDS. So RDS is on a near-term plan as well. Hopefully that'll be on the holiday plan as we spoke of here in the next few weeks. But on the outside, even on the outside, everything that I'm talking about within the next couple of months will be up and running in GovCloud for your use. Following on behind that, or not necessarily in this order, we actually have plans for or are preparing the deployment of Elastic MapReduce, EMR, within GovCloud. So this is where you get back to that, pragmatic parity type of thing. Those things which you would expect to see in any base AWS region, we want to have available in GovCloud for your use. Checking my little clock over here because they said they're going to get the hook out if I don't shut up quick enough. So from that standpoint, that's what we actually have. So kind of as a tenet moving forward for GovCloud, we're actually going to continue to enhance the console with those services that are in there. We're going to continue to support Elastic Wolf. We're going to continue forward, and we're actually going to do outside in and an inside out look. Primarily for you guys, the outside in is looking at ease of use for a customer, not only using the console, but the ability to be able to use those services. With all the changes that we needed to make to these various services, some of them don't operate exactly the way they do in other regions, and we're going to try to smooth that over so that they do operate as near the other regions as possible, such that it's easier for you to move things back and forth. That being one of the other things that there'll be a lot of work on, not only in our case, but also going forward for AWS, and that is the ability for you to be multi-region and do so easily. That includes GovCloud, although there will be intentional blockers in that space for compliance and security reasons. Those blockers will be overcomable ones, but ones that you have to positively make a deliberately intend to do. So that's kind of some of the forward-looking for AWS GovCloud US. And for those of you that aren't necessarily federal US, you did notice that it was AWS GovCloud US in brackets. We are always open and looking for the next GovCloud that may not be within the United States. So there is the possibility and the likelihood, provided the right business case, that we have a insert your country here in those brackets. So with that said, I think the door is open, so therefore I think I'm out of time. I'd like to thank you all for coming to the AWS GovCloud session.